Women in the Vanguard, Reflections on Early Indian Buddhism. This is the abstract, which I hope you have all read and memorized. I will be speaking on the basis of research I've done for quite a long time on the history of the Buddhist nuns in India, based on inscriptions. So in contrast to the previous three papers, which are based on textual narratives, I will be speaking about records left by women, often nuns, but sometimes other women, in inscriptions. So these are in fact historical women about whom we often know nothing else other than that they made a donation. And the question is, were the women you are going to meet merely donors, whatever a mere donor may mean, or were they also intellectual innovators? These inscriptions have been studied, although there are many new ones, largely in the context of donation. There are quite a number of quite good articles about donation at the early monuments of India. From the 3rd to 2nd centuries BCE to about the 1st or 2nd centuries CE, Buddhist ideals and ideologies stimulated a building boom that transformed the landscape of many regions of India. Women and men celebrated Buddha Shakyamuni through his relics. Relics traveled first class in processions of stately elephants celebrated with music and dance. The housing of relics created new landscapes dominated by clusters of stupas and monastic structures. Stupas nestled in the valleys and crowned the hilltops along the pilgrimage and trade routes of the subcontinent. Caves were carved from the living rock of the western coast to function as assembly halls and monastic complexes. In the mid-2nd century, you've seen this chart before, BCE, King Ashoka went on pilgrimage to pay respect to sites connected with the Buddha. Ashoka's inscriptions express his deep concern for the welfare of the Sangha, both monks and nuns, as well as for lay and female practitioners. So here as an example, I look at the Sarnath inscription, which you can see in that shed. And here it is closer up. Closer up. Give you 1 minute to read it. There it is again. The keywords are there. There's no pointer, and I don't know magic to use, but anyway, in that red box you see Bhikkhu Sangha Sa Eva, and then Bhikkhuni Sangha Sa Eva. So this reference of Ashoka, it must be the earliest historical reference in an inscription, apart from texts which are actually physically the manuscripts we have are later. So this is the earliest reference to the Bhikkhu Sangha, Bhikshuni Sangha. That's not the main point. Anyway, the translation also refers to the importance of the unity of the Sangha, and the edict must be announced to the Sangha of monks and to the Sangha of nuns. Thus speaks Devanupriya. The early stupas were built through collective donation by females and males from many walks of life and sectors of society. They were not sponsored as a program, as a unit, by kings or members of the court. This great collective effort of Buddhist communities defined a significant term in Indian cultural history. At this crucial moment, women were among the sponsors and, I believe, the planners. Many of these sponsors were nuns, some were queens and princesses, but the majority were lay followers. Because part of my research is on Bhikshunis, I don't know if it's readable, but those are some of the sites at which we find Bhikshuni inscriptions. This is a little out of date. I don't know how to change the map. Someone did it for me. There are in fact several new sites in the south in Karnataka, Kanaganahalli, which we'll stop briefly at. At any rate, you can see that there are inscriptions of Bhikshunis. This is from about 3rd to 2nd century BCE, up to 2nd and even later, from many parts of India. Nuns were all over the place. And here is one example. Bhikkhunikaye Sangvahikaye Dhanam Alambanam. This is from Sarnath, 2nd century BC, which shows that a nun named Sangvahika donated a base stone. Not actually sure what a base stone is. This is the only occurrence of this term as for using one collection we have in Indian Buddhist inscriptions for Alambana. And so she made this donation to a stupa. But let us move to the Mahabodhi temple. At the Mahabodhi temple, the Vajrasana, many of the railings were sponsored by Arya Kurangi, a queen. And you see the railing along in the front. In fact, the original railing is in the museum, and the copies are at the actual temple today. Arangi Ayaye Kurugiye Dhanam, gift of Arya Kurungi. This is one example. These railings also have narrative or other carvings on them. I think Kurangi has about 10 inscriptions around the Bodhi. The dynasty to which she belonged is not entirely clear. There's a dispute about that. This is another example. So women contributed to the one of the earliest architectural structures we have surviving around the Bodhi tree. There's some confusion. Cunningham and others wanted to have this as an Amorian period railing, but later on it was decided on the basis of the writing primarily that this was from the Shunga period, that is to say a bit later, 200 to 100 BCE, for example. So through these inscriptions we can trace the history of real nuns as opposed to literary or legendary nuns. The inscriptions show us where and when nuns lived and how they contributed to the material and intellectual history of Buddhism. The work of nuns is recorded in numerous donative inscriptions from Sanchi and also Bharhut, Kanare, Karne, Buddha, Nasi, Pital, Koratoni, and Vati, and Mathura. At Sanchi, nuns made a few joint donations, several nuns joining together. There have been several studies on these. According to the calculations of Gregory Chopin, at Sanchi there were 129 monk donors and 125 nuns. At Pauni, another site which I'll show you an example of, there were 3 monk donors and 5 nuns. At Bharhut, 16 nuns and 25 monks. And so on. Many new inscriptions have, however, since been discovered which change the picture somewhat. The inscriptions, which date from roughly the 2nd century BCE to the 2nd century CE, show not only that nuns played an active role in the erection of stupas and viharas, but also that they had the social and economic status that enabled them to do so. Without the participation of nuns and upasikas and other women, who also figure prominently in the inscriptions, the monuments would have been much poorer places. But in general, who sponsored these monuments during the great building boom? None of them has a written history or chronicle, but some indeed, many, have these inscribed records. These are our data for research. And this research has been studied since the last century. People counted noses, made statistics, and drawn up tables. But I do not intend to repeat the statistics or make new tables. The broad and undeniable conclusion is this: that females made prominent contributions to the great architectural and ritual movement of Buddhism across India. How they express their identity through these inscriptions, in these inscriptions, is a complex question, which has been studied by Kum Roy, who unfortunately could not be here this morning, Kirit K. Shaw, and others. In general, the inscriptions include relatively straightforward single donor inscriptions and more complex group inscriptions. In both cases, a person may define themselves with only a single identity or with several identities. In addition to social position, rank, or occupation, people identify themselves by their place of origin, which is still done in many countries, including India today. For example, they say the bhikshuni from Ujjain made this dana. And the question also can sometimes be whether she was a nun in Ujjain or whether her family was in Ujjain. I tend to believe it's the latter. The family identification with the place is what is there in question. In addition to through their relationship to others is another way to identify themselves, to their spouse, their children, and so on, and through their relations to a lineage of learning, teachers, pupils, and so on. Women do all of these in the inscriptions. That is to say, they refer to their husband's identity, they refer to their children, like it might be the mother of the nun so-and-so made this offering. They will say perhaps the mother of the nun from Vedissa made this offering. And for nuns, not for lay people, I think, for nuns the lineages of learning are, I believe, very significant, because that shows that these nuns were part of an intellectual, a conscious intellectual lineage. And these words are usually expressed by the word antewasani, which means a pupil, and they can be a pupil, an antewasani, of either a bhikkhu or a bhikkhuni in the inscriptions. So these kind of give us a map of the fact that there were intellectual systems going across different parts of India in this very early period. These are some examples from Sanchi. These are very old rubbings of the inscriptions on a crossbar of the railing, Samikaya Vichunya Danam. The inscriptions of the early period are usually in Prakrit, and you have two basic forms, Bhikkhuni and Bhikkshuni. So the simplest type, gift of the nun Samika. So a nun, these crossbars at Sanchi can be quite huge, they're not small. So this is a substantial donation. Outside of a crossbar, Ujjainiya Dhammayasaya Matu Vichniya, gift of the mother of the nun Dhammayasa from Ujjaini. Ujjain seems to have had quite a large number of nuns and Buddhists there, which is interesting. Like Theravada is believed, some suggest Theravada came from the Ujjain region to Sri Lanka, and that of course the Dipa ones are quite strong nuns, lists of named nuns. On a coping bar, Navagamikana Upasikana Dana, an example of a group offering of a bar. The group of female lay wishers of Navagama made this offering. So these records include not only single but group community offerings, we could say. Here is an example of a lineage. Let's word pupils. Sagnarakritaya Korami.